Kamakwini, Molweni, Kamalam vangile gantsho. I am 1/3 of Impepho Press, and welcome to the second part of the Impepho Press's Let's Publish Now series. So before we begin, I would just like to thank the people who make this workshop possible. And obviously that's the people who invite us here. So thank you to Poetry Africa, housed by the University of KwaZulu-Natal, within the Center of Creative Arts. We'd like to thank the National Institute for Social Studies, the NIHSS. We'd like to thank the French embassies and the French Institute, the South African French Institute, as well as Total Energies. And also, this is the 25th edition of Poetry Africa. So we're super excited. The theme is Unmute, which seems quite fitting because our conversation is around telling stories and publishing stories, and not just why it's important to publish, but actually how do you get the publishing done. So yesterday we had our first session with Sarah Gotzel, who spoke about, who gave the workshop, you have your manuscript now for the team, and she spoke about the process of publishing, what are the different steps, and what kind of team you would need. And in that, she kind of broke down that obviously once you have your manuscript, you need to get your editing done, then it's your proofing, then your layout, your printing, the launch, and then perhaps we're going to speak a little bit about distribution as well today. And so today my conversation is going to be around editing and how self-publishing can become professional. It's really, really important to think about editing, not just in terms of editing your manuscript, but editing your whole process. So how do you, and we'll speak a bit about what editing is just now. Tomorrow we're going to have Tanya Pretorius, and Tanya's going to talk about the technicalities around publishing. And by technicalities, I mean what kind of programs and software you need to think about when creating layout, artwork, printing considerations, timelines, those kind of things. So what we'd really like for you by the end of this 3-part session is for you to get a sense of what it is you can do in order to have your manuscript from start to finish, publishing it, the process that you can follow, but also if you want to do it yourself, how you can do it yourself. And I think what we're really trying to drive home with these workshops is that just because you're self-publishing doesn't mean you're publishing alone, that you require a team, that you need to work with people. And by working with people, it means that you cannot, I mean, no man is an island, but you can't be so close to the story and then still think that everything is going to be in your hands. It's just, it doesn't work that way. So one of the suggestions that was made yesterday when Sarah was speaking about money is that you can also exchange skills. I have a friend who did some editing work for some healing work. So she needed a particular course that someone could offer, and that person in turn needed editing work. So I think that this is a great strategy for artists, primarily because we don't always have the money, but it doesn't mean that our stories aren't important or that we shouldn't have them, like put them out there. So it's really important to establish relationships with people so that you can put on the table the offer of bartering. And also, like, ungadelela abantu, so ungafiki uthi, oh no, you edit my book and I'll give you 5 copies. That's not bartering. I don't want 5 copies of your book. Because, you know, if it's a crap book, then, you know, they team. What you need to do is to consider in as much as you need my editing skills, what is it that I could possibly need so that the exchange, the value of exchange is the same. So let's start with, what do you understand editing to be? So a simple answer could be that editing is someone who makes sure that what you think you are saying is actually what you are saying. And so that means that you write a story, a short story, or you write a poem, or you write a novel, and you think this is how the reader is going to receive it. And obviously, this is after the whole isolated process of writing, where you're not thinking about the reader, where you're thinking about the story, and you completely just poured out the story in whatever way, whatever process you have. And now you have this story, and you think that it says a specific thing. And then you find out that, ish, I read it, but that's not actually what I got. I mean, that's not actually what I'm hearing. Someone says to you, I read your story, that's not what I got. And then you decide, is that okay? Or have I completely missed the mark? But more than that, an editor, a good editor, is going to tell you, um, this is this is a good story, but it can be a great story, and here's how. So this is what you're doing really well, and this is what you could improve on. That way you can see the potential growth of your story, and as you develop it. So the editing process isn't I've got a final product, now I need you to rubber stamp it. No, the editing process is a back and forth process where I say, here's my story. And then we have a conversation about what you're trying to achieve with the story. I tell you what I've received from the story. And then we find a way of making this the best possible story it can be. And so in order to do that, you need to have an editor who's going to understand your voice, who's going to understand your style of writing, who's going to understand your stylistic intention, who's going to understand your general intention with the story. And so I want you to consider a number of things when editing. The first is, and I'll speak particularly about poetry and short stories because they're collections. So novels work a little bit differently, and certainly non-creative writing works very differently. But I will focus on creative writing because that's my area of expertise, and that's predominantly what we work with at Impepho Press. So let's take Busi's Surviving Loss, for example. So Busi has a manuscript, and we have a look at this manuscript, and we decide this is a manuscript we want to publish. But it's not a finished product. We go through the manuscript, and we're like, okay, Busi, I really like this and this and this and this and this. I think that this might not work as strongly. How do you feel about it? And different editors have different processes. So, for example, with me, my process would be that I would like you to read it out loud so I can hear your voice, so that I can hear what you're not saying, or what the poem is trying to say. Other editors don't need that. Particularly with poetry, I like to do that. The point is, you need to find an editor who's going to understand your process, who's going to fit your process, and who's going to understand your voice and your intention. But in doing that, don't choose your friends. And I say this lovingly, unless you have a really strong circle of a writing community that has become your friends. Don't ask your friends to edit your work. Rather ask someone who's going to have some kind of emotional distance from you, but who's still going to have an appreciation for the work. And I say this because sometimes you need someone who's going to tell you that is really terrible. and there's no salvaging it. You need to kick it out, and it's going to hurt your feelings. But it doesn't mean that you are terrible. It just means that that particular piece of writing is terrible and doesn't serve the story. And so it might be difficult for friends to do that for each other. So now, why do you need this whole process? Sarah spoke a lot about the difference between editing and proofreading and the importance. And it's really important to really think about these steps that we're giving you, or these different stages of publishing, and understand that yes, they cost money, obviously, because we live in a capitalist society. That being said, if you can't afford it right now, find a way, rather be patient and do it well. And I know that people get impatient because you're thinking, oh, my time is running out, or I want to make a name for myself. But if you want to produce a quality product, really give yourself time to work on this team, to work on these different phases, and to gather the resources that are required for them to happen. So with a proofreader, you can get, you can do, even with editing. I know that a friend a few years ago had a reading party, in the same way that musicians have listening parties. So we all sat down, and we got a chance to really listen to her different stories, and we were able to give feedback and critique, and have honest conversation around the stories, and that really helped build her. The same with a writing group. But now with poetry, what you can do, another way to get feedback, and even short stories, is to submit to journals and literary publications. So submit single poems. You can put your poems up on Facebook, on your Instagram. You can put them up on your blog pages, and that's fine. But if you submit them to places where you're going to get rigorous critical engagement, and I know that there's also what's the word? There's an ivory tower associated with some of these publications. And so there are certain types of poems that don't necessarily make it in other journals or in other spaces, because of their style. And I think my motto is, obviously we want to change those spaces and decolonize those spaces, but rather go where you are celebrated. So if you know that my voice isn't the kind of voice that's going to be appreciated in a snooty literary journal, then why go? I mean, you can try, obviously, and you should always try, but why make that your primary focus? Rather see, okay, there are literary magazines that cater to kind of more youthful voices and that are able or willing to explore more contemporary styles of writing and more contemporary styles of presentations of poetry. So why not go there rather? So at this moment, I know that I'm speaking quite a lot. It's a bit strange to kind of speak to yourself, but here we are doing it. If you have any questions and you're watching, please drop it in the chat. So whether you're watching from YouTube, whether you're watching on Facebook, I appreciate the attendees that are here in the webinar room with me. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. Be sure to ask practical questions. I'm happy to answer those. Okay, so what is also important is creating networks. We touched a bit about distribution yesterday, and I know that it feels like I'm jumping ahead, but I want to touch on this a little bit today, because there are beautiful networks that have been created throughout the continent, and these networks are not just reserved for publishers and big time authors. But before I tell you about these networks, what I want to tell you is, you really, really, at the heart of everything you do, and if you hear nothing else that I say, hear this. You have to take yourself very seriously. If you're going to publish your book and you're going to put your name on it and you're going to recruit people to then also put their name on it, then you need to come correct, you know. Do your research, do your homework. Find out, like as in, if you enjoy a specific type of poetry, find out who those poets are working with, who's publishing them, who's editing their work, what kind of work, other work do those publishers publish, and what kind of other work do those editors edit, and really try and go down the rabbit hole of whatever it is that sets you on fire, because that way you get a greater sense of the kind of community that exists, but also the kind of community that you can create if it doesn't exist. And also you get a sense of the kind of work that you need to put in order to be able to catch that kind of attention. So there are African publishing networks on Facebook. You can find pages on Facebook. I know that Sarah mentioned one yesterday, and I think it's in the chat from yesterday's session. There's also something called the Book Fam Africa, and now Book Fam Africa is, in order to get access to that kind of database, you need to connect with smaller bookstores, independent bookstores, and they will help you get into that kind of network. And I say this, so for example, if you go to Zara bookstore and you say you want them to stock your book, you want to do a reading, they're usually very happy to do things like that. Book Circle, Capital, Bridge Books, and that's just in Joburg. There are plenty, what is it called? I know Clark's and the Book Lounge in Cape Town. I know Adams and Adams in Durban. I know that Tutukani Ndlovu has a great network in Bloemfontein. I mean, these are just off the top of my head, but you can reach out to people. Just don't send people a message that says, "Hi, you know, I write poetry." So what? Have a very clear list of, my name is, this is what I write, this is what I do, and this is the kind of assistance I would like from you. And usually what that does is it makes people more willing to help you. But if you just, if you're not sure about what it is that you want from me, I'm not going to think for you and say, oh, okay, perhaps this is what you need. And so I'm not going to look at that message. So just be very intentional in how you approach people. So that's in terms of distribution. And distribution is really, there's also someone named Claire Smith. What? Maybe Sarah, if you can help me out with Claire's, the name of Claire's company, but I think she has a distribution network as well. And she works with smaller bookstores. It is more difficult if you are a self-published person to get into bigger bookstores, but that shouldn't be your aim. I think bigger bookstores have a greater chain, yeah, but you also are competing with a lot more high profile names and high profile books. And so the likelihood of someone walking into the store and picking up your book is smaller than if they walk into an independent bookstore and the book owner has a closer relationship with the books. Because if I walk into a smaller bookstore and I say, I'm looking for some really good queer South African poetry, then they're going to say, oh, okay, yes, go to this, here are some names. But if you walk into a big chain store and you say, I'm looking for, they're just going to point you to the section, and then your book is going to drown in the sea of other books. So a lot of people, they think, okay, let me strive to get into a big bookstore, but that's not necessarily the best move for someone who's self-publishing. And it's really important to, so all of these things add up to how do you make yourself a professional brand, a professional book. So you are creating a professional product. And that means that you need a team that understands these things. And in the absence of a team, you need some kind of guidance that's going to assist you. So there are, Sarah did mention publishing, self-publishing companies, such as Poetry Productions, and Flow can really help you out. But in the absence of that, you can put together your team. I just got the name Claire Rose Jules from Book Lingo. She's a great person to speak to, and does distribution. Yeah, so this is how you get your books into the stores. I'm really excited about Tanya's talk tomorrow because we don't really talk about the technicalities of book publishing a lot, especially when we talk about self-publishing. We're always thinking about the story, and then we're thinking about getting the story out, into the hands of buyers or readers, and that's that technical step is such a huge step. Primarily, if you're self-publishing and you don't really know where to go or how to put a team together. Okay, so back to editing. I know that like I tend to be a bit fragmented and like in the apa, but I'm hoping that this is all making sense. I'm hoping that we're gonna start seeing some questions come through, so that you guys can get everything you need from this session. When editing your collection, I think it's really important to ask yourself, and this is why you need an outside voice to ask yourself, is this a full-length collection or is this a chapbook? And this is a very difficult thing to ask, because sometimes we want to jump for a full-length collection, and we only have publisher like a chapbook's worth of publishable content. So is this work consistently good enough to put into a full collection? And you're not going to be able to answer that for yourself because you're too close to the work. What you need to do is to get an outside voice who's going to say, okay, you've sent me 60 poems. I'm reading these 60 poems, and honestly, I'm liking 10 of them, if even. And that's not enough to make a chapbook. So I think what's missing is if you write something like more like this, or if you work on this poem so that it does more of this, then we can work our way up to 15 poems maybe, and then we can put together a chapbook. And that's a start. If you're in a real rush to publish and you feel like this is something that I need to get off my chest now, then go for the chapbook. And then the rest, print on a blog page. Open a blog page that's going to allow you to release those poems somehow, or hold on to them. Don't throw them away. These are your babies. Don't throw them away. Just because they're, and also just because you have a story worth telling doesn't mean that it's going to translate into a good book. And that doesn't mean that your story isn't important, and it doesn't mean that your story isn't worth telling. It just means that putting it in a book form might not be the best way of publishing it. Maybe you can put it in the form of a video diary, like as in you can start a YouTube page and do video diaries of of you reading your work, and in that you bring these words to life, and that's how you immortalize your voice. That's how you make sure that your story exists, but also that's the best life form for that particular story. So yeah, think about things like that. Think about what kind of publishing will best suit your story, because that thing of thinking that it's going to be the book form isn't always it. I can see that we have some questions, some comments. Okay, so we have a question from Tloleo Lekane. Is there a specific number of pages an anthology length should be to be considered a worthy book? Okay, so I wouldn't concern myself with page length rather than number of items. So, for example, if you're doing a short story collection, an average short story collection is about 100 pages, I think. But if you're doing a poetry collection, an average poetry collection is about 40 to 45 poems. A chapbook would be about 15 to 20 poems. A small short stories collection would be about 3 to 4, maybe, short stories, adding up to maybe about 20 to 25 pages. A novel would be about 150 pages. A novella would be maybe between 100 and 120 pages. 150 plus would be a full novel. Could be considered a novel. I hope that helps. Kolani Ntuli says, rise and salute, networking is important and understanding publishers' genres. Yes, it's very important to understand what kind of work that your publisher, your desired publisher publishes. And so that you can understand whether or not you would be a good fit. It's also, and sometimes it feels like someone is going to, like you're being rejected, Gandhi. It's just not the time. It's not the time for the story, or it's not the time for the person reading to read it. So you could send me a manuscript 5 years ago, and I would have thought, no, I'm sorry, this is not something that we want to look at. But you send it to me now, and you are a different person, and I'm a different person, and we're able to look at it through different eyes, and it feels right. It's very subjective, but that's the nature of asking someone to back your story. You're asking a human being to back your story, and so the human being comes with their own life experiences, life challenges. It's also sometimes when publishers have open calls, really utilize those. But when they don't have open calls, understand that sometimes it's because they don't have the capacity. I mean, Impepho Press is a three-woman team, and all three of us have full-time lives outside of Impepho Press. But we know that when we dedicate ourselves to a story, we want to dedicate ourselves fully. So we published the French Institute of South Africa's Yesterdays and Imagining Realities last year, with the assistance of the IFAS team. But to publish single author collections, we had last published in 2018, and now we're coming up with The Frightened by Letogutle Msimang, which was pre-launched yesterday here at Poetry Africa. And it took us a long time to settle on this manuscript, not because we weren't reading anything in between or we hadn't received other manuscripts, and some really good ones, but they just didn't fit our voice. We wanted, we're looking for work that will haunt us, that will be fierce and bold and do something special and shift vibrations, if we will. And so the writing must be bold, the story must be bold. And it took us a long time to settle on that. And we have other works in the pipeline. But this is to tell you that it doesn't mean that the stories we received weren't good. It just meant that their time wasn't, they weren't the perfect fit, because at the end of the day, and that's how you must think about it, even when you do your story, when you publish your book. Think about the fact that you are taking your money and your hard-earned time, and you're asking other people to do the same, so they could put their name behind this book. Okay. I'm busy. Shakes Tlakwana says, I'm busy writing a novel. So what steps may I take further? Okay, so I mean, it depends how far you are in your novel. I mean, I think maybe Shakes can give me a bit more to go on. You're writing a novel, but how far are you? Have you done your character development? How far is your story? Have you just outlined your story? Have you sketched it out? Have you fleshed it out? Is it a full-fledged story? Um, is it almost finished? I think I would need a bit more information. Also, sorry, I'm parched. I've been talking for like 30 minutes straight. Okay. So yes, I'd need a little bit more information, but I would say that if you feel stuck in your story, especially when you're writing a novel, I think my best advice would be go and live, go and do something to research without actually being actively in the book. Um, you know, read more, interact with more people like some of the characters, or I mean, just live outside of the book a little bit more. And then get a good editor. That might be the best way forward is to get a good editor who's going to look at the pages that you have and who's going to suggest a way forward, tell you what you're missing, tell you what's working, what's not working, where you can grow, and what kind of direction you can take. So yeah, I think if you're still at manuscript stage, then this is the best advice I can give you without knowing where in that stage you are. LaDonna Sanders Ngosi, question. Thank you for the session. What advice do you have for poets and publishers from the diaspora here in the US, especially regarding distribution and also regarding engaging in South African venues? Okay, LaDonna, I think that's a great question actually. So I think that you can, I mean, obviously small publishers are happy to work with small publishers. So for example, with Denai's Feeling and Ugly, which was translated into Portuguese by Sandra Tamali in Mozambique, who runs her own publishing house in Mozambique, reached out to us and said, I really love this book. I'd love to translate it. Can I do that? There's also been an opportunity for so what I'm saying is find the publishing house, a small independent press, or the kind of bookstore, the kind of authors that speak the same literary language as you within the diaspora, and build those networks, and then they can introduce you to their networks. Um, so so I think that would be the best entry point if you don't, if you're working independently. Alternatively, let your publisher know that it's something that you're interested in doing, that you would like to venture into the diaspora, and see what kind of networks they have already existing. As I said before, there is something called Book Fam Africa, which maybe we can chat and see what kind of writing you have and see if I can help you access something like that. And that's a network of authors, publishers, distributors, and booksellers and bookstores from around the continent. And they're really doing some great work, especially in trying to grow printing networks, distribution networks, shipping networks, really asking the difficult questions. But obviously, and I say this without wanting to be a gatekeeper or whatever, I just want to make sure that when you enter into a platform, you come correct, you come prepared, and you come ready with something to offer as much as you're going to also gain, so that we can build productive relationships. Okay, LaDonna, I hope that answers your question. So we're now coming to the end of this session. I'm hoping that I've covered a lot. So perhaps I don't know, Sarah, did we talk about the launching your book a bit? So let me just recap if, in case we didn't. But when you launch your book, what you want to do is you want to do a series of readings where the book is available. This is the best way to sell your book, I think, but also to get your book out there. So one of the things that, for example, made Kollega Putuma so successful was that she organized for collective amnesia. She actually self funded, she raised money herself, and she organized mini launches around the country. So what that meant was that she said, I will come, you give me a venue, you organize the venue, and you organize the launch. I'll come with my books and I'll perform. And what that did is it opened her up to audiences across the country outside of just the audiences that knew her, maybe in Cape Town or maybe through word and sound. So it is really important to think about how do you get your voice heard across the board. Do digital readings, do Instagram lives, and then also visit places, visit libraries. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to have a launch. Go to a bookstore. I remember when I launched Undressing in Front of the Window, which I had self-published. I went to Protea bookstores here in Pretoria, in Tshwane. And Laurette was just amazing. She said, yeah, no, come. We have book readings here all the time, so we can turn a book reading into your book launch. And so that meant that I didn't have to worry about catering and things like that. And then I had a friend, Zandali, who I had met and worked with when au pairing for a German family, who said, I will make you a cake. And she made me a book cake. And I understand that I was very fortunate, but what I'm saying is there are people who have sessions in place. So go to those sessions and see how you can become a part of those sessions so that you can launch your book there. And the launch, in essence, is a live reading presenting your work from, like, as new work, as fresh work. So do that. Okay. So Sarah says, yes, launching is important because it's linked to sales, and will both where the book will go and the sales as well as the networking. Also, multiple launches are completely necessary in different spaces and different networks. Kolani Nduli says, I'm curious if my company is multimedia production, can I include publishing service to the product? If your company is multimedia production, you can include publishing. And so, and I say this with love. If you're going to charge people for a service, or if you're going to promise people a service, deliver. So a lot of people, like, sometimes they'll take chances and they'll say, okay, I'm going to be a self-publishing company, but you know nothing about layout, you know nothing about book production. You know about good stories, but you don't know anything about book production, which is me. I love good stories, but listen, I know nothing about book production. I don't know. I mean, I'm only just learning about paper now, like, as in what paper bleeds through, what paper is see-through, what paper is best for poetry, what paper is best for artwork. So when I met Tanya, and Tanya was able to say, listen, I know this, then we were able to work together and say, okay, then we can work together in this. And so we were able to, like, Sarah and I and Tanya were able to pool our expertise so that we could produce impepho Press. So what I'm saying is, of course, you can include publishing services in your multimedia company. Just make sure that you know what you are charging people for and you give them value for their money. All right. So if there are no other questions, I think we're going to wrap it up. Please do tune in tomorrow for Tanya Pretorius' third installment of this three-part series. And let's publish now, the technicalities of publishing. And then on Friday, what's really interesting and what's really lovely and we're excited about is that we're going to have an offering, an evening with Impepho Press, Impepho and Friends. And so we're going to have Sarah Godsal, Denaimo Botsal, Busisiwe Mahlangu, Lakaya Hicks, Kanye Shusha, and Buhlebendalo Da. And we're going to have a beautiful hour from 5 p.m. live stream on YouTube and on Facebook, where we're going to offer poetry and music and just thoughtful meditation. Okay, so can we touch on the different aspects of editing, form, punctuation, as okay. Okay, so I mean, I think okay, yeah. It would be great to use a case study. So when I said that your editor must understand your voice, your editor must also be a good listener. So when editing a story or editing a poem or editing a novel or create a piece of fiction or a piece of creative writing, we need to be listening to a number of things. We need to be listening to what is the story trying to say and how is it trying to say it, and how do these words appear on paper. So there's some Ubusisiwe has a poem. Some of her poems appear what's this word? Like instead of this way, they appear like this in the book. And sometimes you can't explain it, but it just feels like that's how the story wants to be told, that the story doesn't feel like it's part of everything else, that it wants you to take special attention and care, and it wants you to listen to it. So what I'm getting at is that the form needs to fit the story, and that's why I think, especially with poetry, it's important to read it out loud so that you can hear whether the natural line breaks happen, what the natural rhythm is, not imposed, like as in, because sometimes we want to impose it and do it stylistically, but just read the poem. Don't perform the poems, and then you'll be able to see where the line breaks are, what the stylistic what whether it's a prose poem or, and like, so it would be a prose poem if it feels slightly more dense and it feels more conversational as opposed to more lyrical and narrative, and then that would affect the line breaks. So when I think with an editing workshop like that, I yeah, maybe I should have brought more poems and some of our poems. Let me see. Where's our book? Yeah, I think what I can do is I can arrange maybe a workshop. Maybe we can speak with Poetry Africa, and we can arrange a workshop where we can do some editing work together. Like, as in, maybe we can put together a classroom with some, where you guys can bring some poems and we can actually go through your poems and we can talk about how we edit it, how we break it down, and how we listen. We're not all the same in how we listen to work, but I can give you some insights on my process and maybe that can help. But I think at the heart of it is that editing is an act of listening, and you need to be listening to what the story wants to say and how it wants to be said, and then the punctuation and the form will feed the story. I hope that answers your question. Okay, if there isn't anything else, we're going to end it here and remind you that Poetry Africa, the 25th anniversary of Poetry Africa, is taking place until Fridays. I know that on Friday there will be some live events. I know that in Durban, and I know that for the rest of us who aren't in Durban, there's going to be an evening with impepho and friends at 5 p.m. And tomorrow, Tanya Pretorius will give the third installment of Let's Publish Now. Poetry Africa is brought to you by UKZN, housed in the Center of Creative Arts. We'd like to thank the NIHSS, the French embassies, and the French Institute for South Africa, and Total Energy for making it possible. Thank you so much, Amma.